Welcome back to the Mastering Video Marketing Podcast. I'm Tony Reale.
I'm Ben Carlson.
And today we're doing a special episode.
Very special.
An extended pop culture corner. Woo! For me personally, it's, for those of you that you don't know, I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan.
Case in point.
A little garbed
Case
up here. I've got my Starfleet Academy thing. Here.
Whoa. And this is after the Chateau Picard yesterday.
Right. Yep. Chateau Picard, of course. Yep. And if you watch any of our other NextWaveDV content, you probably have seen my office decked out with a computer board cube and all the other stuff. So anyways, I certainly do enjoy the franchise. And we've just had the finale of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, and I've been kind of talking about it throughout our Pop Culture Corner. And for today's episode, I wanted to talk about the importance of sticking the landing, because for me, Star Trek Picard definitely did that. And it's not just like, hey, that series run went pretty good. We're talking about a franchise, a series that ran for 7 seasons, and then it had 4 more movies, and then there was a big gap, and then they returned and had 3 more seasons. Yeah. And just like with almost any long-running franchise like that, you have your ups and downs.
Sure.
And for me, I'm totally fine forgiving the bad episodes as long as we have the good episodes, and definitely as long as we stick the landing as well. So I will mention, we try to stay spoiler-free in most of our Pop Culture Corner, but today we're going to be talking about spoilers for Star Trek Picard a bit. I'm not going to go beat for beat the entire series, but I'm going to talk about some of the important things that they did well. And it isn't just going to be Star Trek Picard only. We are going to talk about other things, other franchises. And how does this tie into, our main podcast of Mastering Video Marketing? Well, I think it's a good lesson to learn when we see the successes of franchises and why. I think Star Trek Picard, beyond, even if you're not a Star Trek fan, is a great example of, like, if you watch any of the behind the scenes in it, of how that came to be.
Sure.
And looking at other franchises that have kind of failed in recent times of being able to either reboot or finish off their franchises. I just thought it was a relevant thing to talk about. So
yeah, absolutely.
So Star Trek Picard season 3, there were, so going back for those that may not know Star Trek as well, you have Star Trek, the original series, which happened back in the 60s, and then they had the movies that came out, and then there was kind of a revitalization of the franchise. So they decided but the movie characters, the actors like William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, they were kind of expensive. So they wanted to, let's go back to the small screen. So they did Next Generation, which a lot of people initially were really hesitant towards because it did look and feel different than the original series. And for a lot of people, Star Trek was the original series. But eventually, fast forward to today, for a lot of people, Next Generation is Star Trek.
Right.
There's a lot of definition of that. Now, for other people, it could be Deep Space Nine or Voyager, or even Discovery or any of the other stuff. But from a pop cultural standpoint, like when you think of Star Wars, who do you think of? You think of Luke and Leia. You may not think of Rey and
Jar Jar is the first one that comes to my mind immediately. That's what I have a poster of.
Yeah. So every generation has their version of a long running franchise. For Doctor Who, the ongoing question is always who's your doctor. And so for Star Trek, the Next Generation is kind of widely accepted as at least, especially for this current generation, our generation. As being the more dominant of the franchises today. So with the original series, you had 3 seasons, then they ran 2 seasons of the animated, and then they had the 6 movies. And when you got to the 5th movie, it kind of flopped on its face, and a lot of people thought that was the end of that franchise.
Sure.
But the head of Paramount at the time was a huge Star Trek fan, and he wanted to see the series end on a strong note. So they came back and they did 6, which was widely considered one of the best movies, and really did have a nice closure to those characters. Next Generation never really got that.
Sure.
There was kind of, with the 4 movies, the last Next Generation movie was Nemesis, and that one again kind of flopped a little bit, but they never got that closure, that ending. The end of the season, the finale episode of Next Generation, the show, is known as All Good Things, and is widely considered one of the best series finales of all time. Great episode, but then they went into the movies, so then you didn't have that same closure.
Sure.
And with season 1 of Picard, You have Patrick Stewart saying, I don't want to just do season 8 of Next Gen.
Yeah.
He wanted to do something different. So they made it very much a character piece about Picard, which was both good and bad. Some people liked it. Some people hated it. The storytelling was hit or miss at certain points for both season 1 and season 2. I think there's redeemable aspects to it, but it certainly wasn't the strong point that we had, and it definitely wasn't what we got in season 3. And so you had different showrunners coming through it. So Michael Chabon was the first showrunner in season 1, and they made it almost more of an art piece, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
And I don't mind that it exists in the fandom as it is, but we were all kind of itching for more of that. Like when you have Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and you have this kind of tone for that era of Trek, and then Picard is like continuing that thread, but then not being like that show at all. I'm okay with the stories. It's like Mandalorian in a certain regard, where like Mandalorian is a different. Well, at least season 1 of Mandalorian was a different tone than Star Wars proper. Season 3 has gotten to the point where it's almost like Star Wars, which some people like, some people don't like.
It sells.
It does. Sure. Yeah. But again, like the thing that made me fall in love with The Mandalorian is not what they're continuing through in the next show. So that's just the truth of the matter. I found that with these modern shows, they're trying to come in and they're trying to tell different stories that are more relevant, more modernized. One of the things that Trek did well, and like say Lord of the Rings did well, certain franchises, even the original Star Wars did well, is they felt timeless in the way that they talked, in their dialogue. They weren't modern. They weren't contemporary. Yeah. And then you jump to some of the modern Trek, like Discovery, Strange New Worlds, Rings of Power. There's a lot of
buzz cuts. How do they get buzz cuts?
Buzz cuts for sure. Yeah.
How do you get a fade in Middle Earth? Anyway, that's a little all right.
But like the dialogue is very contemporary.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think you got these showrunners that are coming from a perspective of like, we need to hit that CW market or whatever like that. I don't know, but the thing that to me was great about Trek or Lord of the Rings or some of these shows is that they were timeless in their dialogue. They were timeless in their demeanor. Yeah. They didn't rely on contemporary tropes and dialogues and that kind of stuff. And so I can watch it 20, 30 years from now and it still feels relevant. And, maybe the special effects get dated, but like it's still watchable. I mean, the original series is a great example where the show was still so good that they went back and they updated the special effects just to make it a little bit more contemporary, so it wasn't as distracting, so people could still watch it and not be distracted by that.
Sure.
So yeah, with Picard season 3, like one of the things that they did so well was they honored the original characters and they ended up bringing everybody back together. But they didn't just dump it in the first episode or two. It's like, all right, we need to get back together. The Ocean's 11, make a phone call to so-and-so, and like, we got the team back together. Like the way that each of the characters come back together is completely, it makes sense in the storytelling of the world building. Yeah. They are so, it's so well written, and it's not distracting. It's not like, oh, you're just putting this person in here because it's like when they got the Millennium Falcon, they just it was in the corner and they pulled the tarp off, and all of a sudden Han Solo showed up. It's like I don't know. I don't want to throw Star Wars too much under the bus throughout this because it's really that's probably the prime example of a franchise that didn't stick the landing well at all. And so, anyways, the characters coming back together made sense. The characters also were respected. Like they hadn't just been sitting for the past 30 years doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs, or that their life had been ruined or something like that. There was some drama with these characters, but for the most part, they excelled and they grew and they got better and they were in a better place in their life. So I felt like that was exciting and rewarding as an audience, especially coming after Star Wars, where you have all the main characters kind of doing not much. I mean, I
Sure.
guess Leia was, general or whatever, but
Yeah.
like she, Han Solo seemed to have done nothing different.
Right.
And then Luke was just sitting as a hermit.
Yeah.
And then all the characters got killed off.
Yeah.
And they never ended up in the same room.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, yeah. So like you don't get all the characters working together. They're not the heroes of the story in Star Wars. So I'm talking about. They're all killed off at the end. Big spoiler for Picard season 3 is nobody was killed off.
Oh my gosh.
They all lived happily ever after, and it was like that. Oddly enough, that was the most refreshing thing. It was like, hey, these characters that I care about for all these years can have a successful life, and to go on and be happy. And it was really, now they definitely put the drama of it in there, and they did a great job of it, and they gave the characters the stakes. They didn't just undermine it, but I just really enjoyed how they did it. And again, I'm not going to spoil everything, but even the main big bad of it was kind of not surprising, but incredibly satisfying in the way that they did it, and the resolution of it. So, for me, if they had ended at season 2 of Picard, I might have been like, man, it would have left a sour taste in my mouth for even the entire franchise that I love so much. But season 3 ending so well, and I think like it goes back to, we talk about what other franchises have done it well.
Sure.
For me, Endgame is a great example of that. Now I know that Marvel continues, and so does Star Trek.
Yeah.
But that era, that closure of the characters
Right.
was satisfying. Like this build up to Thanos that was done over multiple movies. And then the character growth of all of these primary characters that we see throughout it.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that Endgame did that Trek didn't do is that, they killed off or retired some of its characters really hard. So that was, with Trek, we get to live on with these characters, and they might even continue on because they've talked about a spin-off show happening.
Yeah. I think something that's important to highlight, though, is that what makes an ending good or bad, or whether they stick it or don't stick it, is not, they were able to wrap everything up in a pretty bow and have them live happily ever after. I think what matters most is, does the writing make sense, and does the life and death moving on make sense? I know, in I'm not sure if you've seen Walking Dead. Again, this isn't really sticking the landing, but in talking with some of the heroes' death, Walking Dead was not afraid to kill off characters, beloved characters, main characters, where it's like, how can this show go on? And as you watch the progression of the show, those deaths, and what I think made the show, especially the first 5 or 6 seasons, so unique, was that it really, even though, and there's one character in mind that I'm not gonna spoil because it is a big moment, but even the actor himself said, I want this death. Almost like a hero's death where he fell on his sword. As an actor, he's like, let me have this, please. For my character's sake, this is how I want to go out. And it was crushing. I'm not afraid to say I literally cried when this character died, because you do get so attached, and he was such a pivotal part, and he was such an anchor to the core of it, but it made sense in the story, and it was so well written. It was like, gosh, yes, he had to. Mm-hmm. He had to die. That in this way, he had to go. And I think, that's part in Picard, and granted, I haven't seen it, but it sounds like the writing was intentional, that it made sense that the life lives on. And I think where Star Wars falls flat is, and we've talked about this before, the difficulties of writing a sequel or writing things that are set to take place 5, 10, 30 years later is, even if you have great writing during a show run, those writers have spent years focused on minute details and crafting these characters' lives and their stories. And if they aren't willing to invest that same energy and that same brain space into writing those in-between spaces, I think that's where a lot of shows fall flat. Yeah. Star Wars is a great example, where it's like, oh, you just sat on an island and he was dark and moody, and that makes sense-ish, but it was lazy. That's lazy writing, in my opinion. Now, granted, they have an incredibly hard job. I'm not going to try and diminish what they're doing, because I could not do better. I'm not saying that, but I think that's what really sets it apart is that intentionality in how you're finishing things off. Breaking Bad, I think, is one that is one of the most, not most iconic, but is another really iconic one for just nailing it, where you have some life, you have some death, but the overall resolution makes sense. And it makes sense within the context of the story. It makes sense within the context of the universe that it's set in. And it's one where it's like, oh no, yeah, this was beautiful in the way that it happened. And, it's kind of, I'm a big jazz fan, player, musician, not aficionado. I like jazz. And one of the things that makes jazz irritating to people is there's so much dissonance in it. It's like music. But I think what the beauty of jazz is it's not in the dissonance, it's in that resolution where it's kind of like, if you're about to pop your neck or you have to crack your knuckles and it's like, and snap. And that release, I think there's something so beautiful and so rewarding in that. And it's just a matter of finding the right timing and the right writing to be able to bring that message home. And some do it well and some don't. But I think if we were to quantify what is sticking the landing, quote unquote, how do you quantify that? Because there are some that have done great and there are some that have flopped. How I Met Your Mother was, in my opinion, a big flop where it seemed like they had this. I mean, throughout the show, there's things interwoven and everything makes sense. And then you get to the end and it's like, okay. And it just falls short because there's that lack of intentionality.
Well, I've talked about before, like, I used to be a huge J.J. Abrams fan, but he's kind of fallen off for me in a big way because he doesn't stick the landing well at all, in my opinion. Sure. And it's not just Star Wars, like Alias, Lost, a lot of these shows where it's like Lost, they have a really good premise, they've got a great idea, and then they just never finish it all the way.
And a big following. I mean, I think one of the biggest examples is Game of Thrones. Now, I still have not seen it. I've tried, and I know people say, "Oh, you just got to get through." I've tried watching. I think I've made it through episode 6 of season 1. I can't stay awake. It's not for me. It's no shame on or shade on anyone that has. But I do know, even as someone who's not been in the world at all, I know that they messed up because the outcry was so bad on the resolution where it was like, you did all of that work. You brought us in for 9 years and this is how you let us down. And I think that hurts.
And that goes back to the title of this podcast of like why it's so important to stick the landing, because it isn't just, hey, we need to wrap this up. Now I think it's so vitally important that how you end the franchise or that era of storytelling is more important than how you start it.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's the the Return of the King, where I need to have satisfaction so that when I start, if I go back, I like to rewatch stuff. I don't know about you. I love to rewatch stuff. My wife sometimes gives me a hard time. She's like, I don't understand. Didn't you watch that? And I'm like, yes. But her thing is like she doesn't retain. She has a horrible retention when it comes to stuff. So we go back and watch stuff, and she's like, "Oh, I forgot this happened." And I'm like, "Great!" So you're watching it for like the first time almost, and I'm rewatching it for the 50th time, and I'm still gleaning stuff off of it because, as a filmmaker, as a video content creator, I love not just the storytelling, the cinematography of it, but I love the behind the scenes and going back to what we talked about. I've watched several interviews with the showrunner Terry Matalas and some of the other writers, and I've
this is for Picard.
For Picard, yeah.
Okay.
And you hear about like, there's more to. A lot of people think it's just like, well, the writers sucked, or you got to put pen to paper. It's like, well, especially when it comes to like a franchise, you have so many different. You have the execs at the high level. And then you have like franchise managers that are basically saying, this is we are willing to let the franchise get pushed and pulled in this direction. Oh, you want to dump a totally new alien species that like destroys everybody? Well, that might be pushing it too far, whatever like that. So now, you got those things going on. Then you have the executive producers, you got the penny pinchers that are saying, all right, this is the budget you get and this is all you get.
Yeah.
So it isn't just the writing. It's not just saying like, well, we
Sure.
we wrote this, we wanted, the entire galaxy to blow up or whatever, like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we don't have the budget for that or whatever.
Sure.
So like, famously, and whether it's a spoiler or not at this point, it's all over the internet, but the Enterprise D comes back at the end of season 3 of Picard.
Yeah.
And they really kept that under wraps. You would think like when they showed that they were bringing back the Millennium Falcon in Force Awakens, was like one of the first things that you saw in the trailer.
Right.
There
They
was
were
no
making sure
yeah.
you knew the Millennium Falcon was
There was
coming back.
nothing in the trailers for the Enterprise D coming back, and I'm sure that there was a lot of the marketing departments of Paramount were like, but this would get a lot of views.
Sure. Yeah.
So as soon as it they pushed it back until after been about a week that the episode came out, and then it was everything.
I'm sorry. Your Wisconsin accent came out so much, and I just really enjoyed the idea of like a Wisconsinite in Star Trek. It was that was enjoyable. So a lot of views. Yeah.
But yeah, like granted, once it was revealed and the audience, those that were watching it right away got to see it, then it was all over the internet.
Oh
and it
no,
was,
the Romulans.
Yeah.
I'm loving it. All right. Okay. Yes.
So you got marketing, you've got all these different departments that are fighting for stuff. You got different writers in the writers' room.
Yeah.
You've got actors. Like in Star Trek, for example, when the characters are first brought into a brand new show, a lot of times it's execs and writers, and that's it. They're the ones that are driving the storytelling. And as an actor, you don't really get that much say.
Sure.
But when you get to be a little bit more to do and you warrant that now, like I remember Terry Matalas saying like he had to go to each of the main cast of the Next Generation and sell them on where he wanted their characters to be, because they made an interesting point that I never thought about, but like these actors have to go to the conventions and they have to justify the choices that their characters make to the audience.
And the bigger the franchise, the more fanatic the fans. So,
and when you get like somebody like Data or Captain Picard or whatever that are saying, when you get the actors saying, "Well, I didn't write it," that
sure.
So they don't want like stupid decisions that their characters are making.
Oh wow!
And so they want to be on because that's the rest of their life is now going to conventions and people asking them, "Why did your character do this or that or the other thing?"
Yeah.
So that's something they want to be on board with. So, which I think was a great thing because in season 3 of Picard, like each character was thought through. They worked through each of the actors and said, "All right, has Geordi been for the last 20 years? Where has Beverly been? Where has Worf been?" And each of the characters have this really interesting growth, not in a way that completely undermines or ruins their characters, but shows them growing beyond where they were before.
Sure.
And just it was really, really satisfying. But again, from that point of, it's interesting because you need to have that level of acceptance and buy-in from the actors. So you have all these things happening. You have to have satisfy execs. You got to satisfy the penny pinchers. You got to satisfy the franchise managers. You got to satisfy the actors, and hopefully make something that the audience likes too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that's it speaks to why The Office has done so well. I have a lot of shows. It's like just get through the first season, and I think you'll really like it. Or I got to get through this. The second season is where they really hit their stride. And one of the things I really enjoy about The Office is the writers were literally in the annex. If you have watched the show, the writing team sat in the annex when they weren't filming there, and so it wasn't they weren't in some studio in Hollywood that they were off and then they would bring the script down. They were oftentimes hearing the production going on, so they were so intimate with each character to the point where several of the writers and producers were main characters on the show. And so you get this very intertwined this dynamic where it's not only are they invested in the characters, because I think a lot of writers and a lot of producers, they're invested. This is what they're creating. But The Office, I think, did an interesting job, and I think Picard is doing it as well, where Terry Matalas is a huge Trek fan, and it's deep within, and they have this emotional connection, and I think that really sets apart a show and really kind of helps elevated into something even greater.
Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, going back, I think Picard season 3 really reminded me of the importance of sticking the landing, and then it made me go back and think about like other shows that struggled through it. And some of them are harder to go back and watch. Like, I love Pirates of the Caribbean, but it kind of fizzled as each movie. And I still like that world, but it's I don't. Like when I watch Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring is my favorite of them because it really sets up that adventure. I remember the first time watching it and just blowing my mind and like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then by the time I get to Return of the King, I'm very satisfied. But I think like even like with the Marvel films, I say still Iron Man is my favorite because it was, if I start that movie, I have the optimism of like, I'm going on another adventure and by the time I get to the end, it's going to be this build up and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I recently started going through those movies with my kids and just seeing it through their eyes of like, oh my God, what happened? they came together. Oh my gosh, Star-Lord and Iron Man are talking. This is amazing. And so like, yeah, I remember that experience too of going through and watching those movies and then knowing at the end, it's going to be this satisfying conclusion.
Sure.
And there are shows that I remember really liking, like Alias, where I'm like, this show's awesome. And then I get to the end and I'm like, I'm never watching this again.
Sure.
It's because I can't. I mean, no matter how good the rest of it was, it didn't have that satisfying conclusion.
Sure.
That makes me, you want to be rewarded as an audience.
Sure.
And I think that's why it's really important as content creators that we're creating the storytelling and that journey through it, to tie this into the core idea of our podcast, the Mastering Video Marketing is, when we're creating marketing material, we can be telling stories through that, and it's not just like telling a really emotional TV commercial within 30 seconds, which I love doing.
Yeah.
But like actually telling a story arc to your marketing content strategy.
Yeah.
You do a lot of the email marketing for our clients.
Right.
And we've talked about as we're developing some of these strategies, like we don't want to treat it like, here's one email and it has a beginning, middle, and end, and then that's it.
Yeah.
We want to treat it almost like frames in a storyboard.
Yeah.
Where this email is telling a story which will lead into the next email and have them hopefully looking forward to that next email instead of regretting it.
Yeah.
And that is the most effective way to use email marketing. But you can do the same thing in your content. And an example is like we'll often use, Quinn, who's over to my right.
Hey, Quinn.
Hard cord editing right now. He does our shorts. And when I give him a podcast, for example, to do shorts, I'll go through and I'll chop up one of our podcasts into what I think are about the 1 minute, marks of good content. But a lot of times we're beginning a thought and we're not going to finish it there. If you watch, so for the people that don't want to sit and watch a full 1 hour podcast,
First of all, you're missing out.
Yeah, you are. There's still more things that we talk about in here, and then you won't get. But those shorts, if you watch like 5 or 6 shorts in a row over the course of a few days, there'll be a complete thought that's shared with it. And so there's something to be said about that. I think that there is an importance now. Maybe we're not sticking the landing because that story continues, but definitely having that story arc and being thoughtful and purposeful in it, and not just going, here's Force Awakens. We'll see what the next guy comes up with.
Yeah. Well, and I think you really hit it. Your audience deserves to be rewarded. You are paying and vying for attention. And we've said it over and over, attention is the most valuable resource on the planet today. And that's what everyone is vying for. And that's what everyone's trying to get. And if you get that attention, it's so important that you reward it. And you give them something where it's like, thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. Because it is a very basic human level, even not basic. I mean, that's how you train, that's how you train animals. That's how you train people. Behavior science all is about reward and feeling satisfied in what you're engaging in. So is your content, is what you're doing giving that same satisfaction? Is it giving a reward for their attention?
Because again, I go back to, it's not just that you told a complete story and then now it's satisfying to be ending. It's also like I want to go back and consume it again.
Yeah.
It makes when I like for example, Data, Data, the Android character in Next Generation. His goal throughout, like even the very first episode of Next Generation, he's like, he's like Pinocchio. He wants to be a real boy. And then they went all the way up through Generations, the first of the of Next Gen movies, where Data gets an emotion chip because he wants to understand it, but he's still not quite understanding it. He's still just learning how to handle emotions.
Yeah.
And so they deal with that a little bit in the movies, but then because Brent Spiner is playing an ageless character, they felt that, hey, we should kill this character off because I can't keep doing this.
Sure.
So in Nemesis, they killed him off. Well, in Picard season 3, they found a way to bring him back, and they also found a way to not just de-age him because that's the cheap way of doing it. Well, it's an expensive way, but it's the cheap from a storytelling standpoint. They brought the character back with age, and through that, he's like a combination of all these other androids that the Dr. Sung had done. This big spoiler, I guess, again, but that what the satisfying moment in it is that he was he had now achieved a level of humanity that was like more than he'd ever achieved before.
Sure.
And so we have a character growth for this one that was, he was killed off, but still then brought back in a way that was satisfying. Because I'm like, come on, man, you killed him off. You know, like this isn't, just bring back characters. But at the end of it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was really, really rewarding. Sure. And we get these deep character moments. Like there's towards the end of the series, again, spoiler, but one of they have kind of a Return of the King ending to the show. Like the last third of the show is just wrapping up things with all these characters, and one of them is Data's having a counseling session with Counselor Troy, and he's just like, I saw a person petting their cat the other day, and I broke down crying. It was hilarious, but awesome, and it's rewarding as an audience because like, oh my gosh, like I went back and I've been rewatching Next Gen with my kids, and there's an episode called Birthright where Data gets like electrocuted, and it activates a dormant program in his that his creator had made for when he got to a certain level, he could start dreaming. And I remember watching that when I was a kid, and even years ago, I'm like, yeah, that's a step. But now watching Picard season 3 and seeing that was another step in Data's growth towards this, and that he gets there. Yeah. And that, it's just really, really satisfying to go back and watch that. And I feel like, again, if we're doing a good job in our storytelling, that we are creating, we're creating later content that also makes our earlier content more rewarding, more interesting. Sure. The storytelling that you see on NextWaveDV as a channel, one of my first videos is just me making a jib out of a clothes hanger, and it was a steel clothes hanger. It wasn't even aluminum, so the thing was weird and imbalanced. And but it was back in 2007, I think, way in my early novice days of stuff. And I was just trying, and I leave that video up there because it shows how far we've come, and I think that there's a story to it. Now, whether you want to watch it from the standpoint of, I'm going to learn how to build a jib. Well, there's probably better videos out there of people that have done it. But I enjoy the story to say this is where we came from, and the different types of gear that we went through, and the tutorials, and all the different interests that we've had over the years. There's a story in that, and whether you feel like you want to watch it or not, I know that story there tells that story, and I can go back to it and I say, this is where we've come from. Yeah, and we were super novice. Sure. We were self-taught. And now we have our own studio. We've got fancy camera gear, things that when I was younger, 10 years ago, would have a pipe dream. Now it's just part of my kit. Sure. Working with clients that I would have dreamed to work with, and now they're a phone call away, and we work with them on a regular basis. Yeah. Building an online reputation that was, never thought of. Would have been beyond a pipe dream when all these years ago, and now it's just something that we now have to regularly interact with. Yeah. It's now more of a responsibility than it is a thing that you attain. Yeah. And so I that's kind of almost the biggest thing now is just managing the work.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, you and I just spent half the day going through all these projects that we have working on, and it isn't drumming up new business. It's making sure that we're not letting business slip through the cracks, that, meeting all the responsibilities we have for our clients.
Yeah. I just want to go back really quick, because I think, what you talk about, building that story, I think a lot of companies are afraid to be vulnerable. Because they feel like they have to be polished, because that's everything was, we need to have it photoshopped on magazines, and we need to have perfectly edited TV, a tight 30 seconds for TV. And I feel like social media has changed the way that we as consumers want to interact with companies. Gap is a perfect example. On their TikTok, and to their credit, I think they're shifting and pivoting and getting on the right track. But for a long time, Gap is a global empire, and they had like 31,000 followers. They were getting next to no interaction because they were so focused on, does this look pretty? We're going to have a model turn just the right way and look, and no one was into it. And then you have companies like Bose, and it looks like they gave a high school kid their phone and was like, go make some stuff. And the internet went nuts, because people want personality. They want to feel engaged. They want to feel connected, and coming back to it, they want to feel rewarded. I would much rather watch a funny video from a brand than Gap jeans are 30% off. Okay, cool, neat. Hey, I guess, maybe go check it out. So I think as you're developing your strategies, it is important to not just say, oh, how can we make the audience feel, how can we connect with the audience, but how can you make the audience feel connected to you? How can you personalize yourself? Candid content is a great way to do that. And it's something that's organic and natural, that you really, even if the best that we could, we can't capture that because we're not in a day-to-day basis.
So I'll stop in real quick. Candid content, what he's talking about, is part of our Video Pathfinder training.
Shameless plug.
No, it's free to download. So it's, but definitely check it out. We talk about the different categories of social media content, candid content being one of them. And so if that's something you're interested in, it's a free marketing masterclass, 40 minutes long, videopathfinder.com. Definitely check it out. It's something we put a ton of effort into, because we talk, we do podcasts, we talk about this stuff all the time, but we wanted like a resource that was really condensed. Here's the core of how to have a good social media strategy. Yeah. And then we use our, NextWaveDV as a platform to talk about it in more depth. But if you want that distilled, this 40 minutes, I've had so many businesses come and say this was a massive tool in getting them up and running and creating a successful campaign. Yeah.
Because a lot of, in the webinar, we talk about, the different versions, and polished posts are a very common one. They're what Gap was doing. They're very beautiful, aesthetically pleasing. They probably paid a ton of money to do it, but where the audience wants to gauge is they want to know that you're a real person. They want to know that there's real people on the other side of that camera, which, you look at, I do it quite often on TikTok, joining in like work groups where I'm just going to sit with someone else who's working. I have no idea who they are, but we're going to work for 15, 20 minutes and we co-work together. That is an absurd idea. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the idea that I'm just going to sit with someone, not talk, not engage, just sit with them and work, it would be asinine. But now it's such a common thing where people want to feel engaged, they want to feel connected, and we're doing it differently now. And so I think if you can create your content, both social media and regular advertising media, to be able to draw in an audience, connect them to you and really what you're passionate about, whether it's a service, a product, a nonprofit, whatever it may be, and then help them feel connected to that, and then give them something. Give them, whether it is an entertaining post, that's one of the other categories we talk about, entertaining or educational. Make it worth their time to interact with you, and you're going to see huge results off of it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should go ahead and wrap this up. This was a great podcast.
Are we gonna do the pop culture's corner?
Yeah, the tiny the mouse hole. I will say I took my family to see the Super Mario movie.
How was it?
All right, so going back to Star Trek Picard season 3, even though a lot of the stuff wasn't surprising, it was satisfying.
Sure.
I feel like Mario. Now, Picard season 3 has been critically acclaimed. All the reviews have been pretty positive for the most part. interestingly enough, the Mario movie has not been. It's around 60-something%, I think, around Tomatoes, maybe lower than that. But the audience score is around like 98%.
Yeah.
And so, I watched the movie and there was nothing surprising about it, but it was like, what is there anything ever surprising in a Mario game? Like, I don't feel like it was. They played it so safe that it was distracting in any way. It was just, that's the story of Mario.
Sure.
And, you got to see, all right, there's many ways that they could have approached it. And I think they did a solid job in it. And it's a movie that I'll be able to enjoy with my kids multiple times. Sure. It was, it had the only thing that I didn't like about it was the Illuminationisms in it. I'm not a fan of Illumination as an animation studio.
Sorry, guys.
Fundamentally, there's some of their stuff that's decent, but like every animation studio has their isms.
Sure.
Disney Animation, Pixar, DreamWorks. There's a meme out there online, you could look it up, where they show like Pixar. They talk about how they give these characters deep emotional structure. Like you've got like Woody, who's a toy cowboy that has been a best friend of his owner Andy, and then a new toy comes along and he feels like he's replaced in this so all this deep character stuff, and then they juxtapose it with like Pixar or with DreamWorks, and they're like, and DreamWorks just makes characters that make funny faces. It was like, that's pretty much. Illumination, I feel, has some of those isms in how they approach stuff, kind of, some of the comedic bits of the, I can't even label them all, but like, when something, it's that moment where like, whether it's not a jump scare in a movie where you know it's going to happen. Yeah. And then you're just waiting for it, and then it happens. And then, or like somebody falls off a ledge, and then everybody's like, and then they like, how long are you going to stretch this before you just reveal that the person just held on to the edge of it? Like, nothing is surprising me. Illumination has a ton of those,
sure,
and not just those things, but like across the board. And so, most of the movie is just those beats.
Yeah.
And
did Mario fall into that?
I think they did a lot of it in there. And it was borderline distracting. Like, again, I'm watching most of the movie and I'm just like, oh my, this beat after this beat after this beat. Like, I feel like Pixar and Disney don't do that as much.
Sure.
DreamWorks, Illumination definitely do a lot more. So, if you had asked me who would I have preferred to animate that, well, definitely probably Disney or Pixar.
Yeah.
And I still have a little bit of a hard time with the redesign of the Mario characters proper. Like, they illuminated them.
Sure.
They gave them that Minions-y look with the eyes and everything like that. And I'm so used to these characters now from Mario Odyssey, Mario 3D World, Smash Brothers, everything. Like, they've really, back in the 90s and late 80s, like Mario was changing with every iteration because like we can do it in 3D now. We can change his proportions. He went from 8-bit to 16-bit. Now he's in 3D. Now we have the GameCube and it can do higher resolution. We're getting closer and closer to animation. It's slowed down a lot more as we've gotten into Mario 3D World, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, Odyssey, all that kind of stuff. They still do tweak them a little bit. I've seen some videos where you're like, it's the same Mario model. And then you watch these YouTube breakdowns and you're like, oh, wow, they actually do change it quite a bit between these different games. All that said, the Illumination style is like it's, I don't want to say it's like the Wish version of a thing, because it's not bad. It's just not. And again, with having Chris Pratt voice it, I thought, do you know who Charles Martinet is? He's the guy that voices Mario.
Oh, okay, sure.
He was first hired for Mario 64. And what was interesting, that story too, was that Charles Martinet was initially, he came into a casting call to do the voice acting, and everybody was treating Mario like a New York plumber.
Sure.
And that so they, hey, what's Mario? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And then he comes and he goes, wahoo, let's go. Here we go. And, he does the whole thing. And you're like, I think that opened up Nintendo to, wait, that wasn't what we were thinking at all.
Yeah.
And so across the board, anyways, to have Chris Pratt come in and voice it, like at the very beginning of the movie, they have Mario doing that voice, Chris Pratt, and then they show it in a TV commercial, and then he's like, all right, let's, and then they go to their normal New Yorker voice, and the implication is that he only did that as like on when he was playing a character in the commercial. But then they have like Charles Martinet playing a different character, and he kind of does
in the movie.
Just for a brief moment.
Interesting.
Just because like I saw that his name was in the credits. I'm like, how are you bringing him in and then not having him do Mario?
Yeah.
And so the idea was that Chris Pratt's like, was that offensive? And then then Charles Martinet playing like just another Italian character. He's like, oh, it's a good or something like that. I'm like, all right. I think Charles Martinet actually plays Mario's dad in it too, if I remember correctly. So like they have him voicing a couple different things. So anyways.
I'm excited to see it.
Yes, it is a fun movie to watch with kids. Kids loved it.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, when's the next one? They have a little teaser, post-credit teaser. Nothing tense, but like you definitely like, all right, they're definitely doing another movie. And it recently crossed the $1 billion mark, so they're definitely making...
Billion?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It is the most successful video tie-in game of all time, or movie of all time. And it's rapidly it's on pace to surpass Frozen.
Wow.
So yeah, they're definitely gonna be doing more.
So to wrap this all up, when we first watched the trailer, we were driving back from a proposal, and I remember we pulled over, and they had just launched it. We're like, all right, we are watching this. We are taking the time, and we were watching this. And I remember when we watched it, I said, what do you think? And you said, I'm interested to see if they can stick the landing. Did they do it?
I think as soon as I was able to set aside my preconceived notions of what I would want to, because like I've said it before, I feel like they could do a Mario movie where he doesn't talk as much as they're doing that. Like if you watch movies like Shaun the Sheep, where they don't have dialogue in it. Like you can tell a story like that. Now, would it have been the same movie? Not at all.
Sure.
So there's that to say. Setting aside my history with Mario, like I said the same thing with like the Halo series. Like to a certain extent, I had to set aside what I knew about Halo to watch it, and the show is still ongoing, so they haven't had a chance to make the landing, let alone stick the landing. So it's in limbo for me whether I like the Halo show or not. Importance of sticking the landing.
Yep.
But for the Mario movie, I walked away with like, this is probably the best way they could have done it. Because I look at like Lightyear, the Buzz Lightyear movie. The first thing that was wrong with that movie is that at the very beginning of the movie, they have this text. Have you seen the movie?
No, not yet.
The first thing in the movie is that they have this line of text that just says, in 1995 or whatever like that, Andy went to see a movie about Buzz Lightyear. This is the movie that he saw. So if they had not had that line, the movie would have been about 80% better. Sure. Because by having that line, the problem is that now because it changes, it circumvents expectations about everything that was established. Who is Zurg? Yeah. The way that they portray Zurg in the movie is completely different than everything that had been established previously. Sure. Which is fine if you wanted to tell a new, unique story, but it doesn't tie in and make any sense. So across the board, like I look at Lightyear as an example of like they told different stories. They really there were twists and turns, and I wasn't expecting that. And at the end, I was like, meh. Sure. Because it's a decent science fiction story. It was a bad Buzz Lightyear story. Okay. And for Mario, I'm like, I wanted a good Mario story. Yeah. I didn't need it to be this amazing animated adventure that tells this crazy cool story. So hold up, we still got it. Sorry. I didn't need that. I needed a good Mario movie, and I thought that this is probably the best Mario movie they could have done without really trying to stretch and push it in a different direction that would have possibly undermined the entire franchise that they're telling a story about. Yeah. So.
Good deal. Good deal.
All right. Well, this has been a fun extended pop culture corner.
Yes. Yep.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time.